different format today, and we're going to do an interview. And our own Columbus Rotarian, Kathleen Locke, is a wealth consultant to families, and she is going to conduct our interview today. She was recognized by Forbes as one of the top advisors in the state of Ohio. She holds a designation in Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, and that gives her expertise in having this interview today with our guest, Mary Lazarus, who's going to talk about her own perspective in philanthropy. Now, Kathleen has been a member for more than 25 years, and she's known Mary for about 15 years. So she extended this invitation to Mary, and she was gracious enough to accept and come today. So would you please help me welcome to the stage Kathleen Locke and Mary Lazarus.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for coming today, and even a little rain didn't keep this crowd away. Among our guests, we have, I think we heard close to 60 guests. I just wanted to mention some of the organizations that are represented today. And we have donors, we have advisors, we have board members, we have nonprofit organizations all here today, from the Columbus Foundation, the Women's Fund, Columbus Metropolitan Club, Action for Children, the United Way, the Columbus Jewish Foundation, Big Brothers Big Sisters, CATCO, Cancer Support Community, Ballet Met, Kappa, and even Vet Motorsports. They're all interested in Mary's perspective. And we also welcome, well, no, nobody's going to pursue her as she leaves today. I'll make sure she's safe. But it's important to have her perspective, all of her years of experience, why she partners with certain organizations, what she looks for as a donor and philanthropist and board member. And I wanted to welcome Mary's family, and some of her very close friends are here today. And of course, Rotary, and you just heard from Dana, Rotarians have a rich history of service. That's really what we're built on. Service above self is our motto. I think that Mary symbolizes that perfectly. We provide funding and volunteering and piloting programs for people locally and around the world, as you heard. Rotarians also mentor and financially support middle school age children, high school age children, and college age children as they launch their lives of philanthropy. So I'll be asking Mary some questions today, and we hope to have time to save a few for you all, so be thinking about what you'd like to ask her. I wanted to introduce Mary properly. She is a role model for effective philanthropy and has made significant impact through her commitment to various organizations in Central Ohio. A civic and philanthropic leader who has used her voice to further social justice in our community, Mary has been inducted into the City of Columbus Hall of Fame and has been honored with the YWCA Women of Achievement Award. Mary has served as founder and past president of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, past president and trustee of the League of Women Voters of Metropolitan Columbus, past president of Action for Children. She's also served as a trustee for the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, Thurber House, and Players Theater. She's been instrumental in helping to create the 7 Generation Circle of Women and has served as co-founder and past trustee of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. Mary is a proud mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, and was married to her husband Bob for over 60 years. She enjoys tennis, reading, theater, and of course loves the city of Columbus. Mary will be sharing her insights from her vast experience as a community leader, and will discuss the importance of philanthropy to herself and to her family. So, Mary and I have known each other a long time. I approached her a few months ago and said, would you speak to my Rotary Club? And I think your response was, Rotary? What would they want to do with me? And over the past few months, we've gotten to know each other better, and she's gotten to know Rotary a lot better. And there's such a connection, I think, between the life that Mary's led for the community and the work that Rotary does. So I think you'll see why this discussion is a great fit for Rotary, and President John, thank you for hosting it. In fact, I think if we were to ask people in the room today who is a donor or a board member or a representative of a nonprofit organization or just a parent who's trying to teach good philanthropy lessons to your own children, every hand would go up. So not only do we have a diverse room in terms of the organizations that are represented, but in terms of how these people all fit with the organizations they care about. So this, to me, seems like a great, diverse group to hear your feedback and your thoughts about how philanthropy has been important to you and to your family. And, I think one thing that organizations are struggling with is to get a better donor, you can't just expect them to put another zero on the check. It really has to be more of a partnership. Donors like Mary are advisors, they're mentors, they're problem solvers. They partner with the organization to help create something meaningful, not just for the organization and the beneficiaries of the organization, but also for the benefactor and their families. So I have some questions that Mary hopefully will be able to share her perspective on. So you've been around charitable people your whole life, and I know your parents were charitably inclined, and you learned some lessons a long time ago. And then also through your in-laws, and the F&R Lazarus Company was philanthropic, and then you and Bob would make your decisions together, and now you and your family, with Tripp, who's here today with his family, you stay involved, and it's just so multi-generational that I thought maybe you could talk about from way back when your parents taught you lessons about philanthropy to how you talk to your children and grandchildren about philanthropy. What are your feelings about that?
Phew. That's a tall order, isn't it? First, just before I get into any of that, I do want to say that I'm so honored to be here and was honored when Kathleen asked me. As she pointed out, we really met through various things, but probably mostly through Action for Children, and the philanthropy surrounding that. And Kathleen said, would you come and talk to Rotary? And yes, I did say, what would they want to hear? And then, and I'm not giving a speech, but when I said, could we have a conversation, she jumped on that. So I've, of course, as all of us have always heard of Rotary, mostly heard about it because people were in the city and they'd say, oh, it's Monday and I've got to find a place to go to my meeting. I don't think until these last few months I've appreciated how much service Rotary really does. I mean, so many things have stuck out to me. One that's at the top of the list here is the idea that you have given out 5,200 dictionaries to third graders in this community over the last year. I mean, that's just incredible. But all the other things which were mentioned. So I have a much, much greater appreciation for service above self, and I thank Kathleen for letting me share a little of my perspective with you. Yes, I grew up in my own family. I grew up in Connecticut, and my dad in particular was very much a philanthropist, not with great means, but with great heart and resource. And this was during the war. When we say the war, we mean the Second World War. I don't think, I've come to realize that when we say the war, not all our kids know which war we're talking about. But there are enough of you out there who do know. Anyway, his particular efforts during those years were bringing refugees out of Europe and Germany, and but he was also so involved as well as raising and giving money. So I grew up with that. Then fast forward, I went to work in New York, and I met my husband Bob, and I ended up in Columbus. He said, first thing he said was, you want to come for a football game? I said, what? My friend said, you're going to Columbus. But then later he asked me to marry him. And actually his sister's daughter is here today. There she is, Babette. And so it was her mother who suggested that we meet. We did. I came to Columbus. So I came to a city where the Lazarus family and business, as you pointed out, just were so involved in the community and in philanthropy and giving back. And their belief always was that whatever was good for the community was also good for business. I mean, that it was important to them personally, but it was tremendously important also to business. So they, Bob's dad was completely involved in Children's Hospital. Bob's mom was one of the founders of Planned Parenthood here, and many other things. So and anybody new coming into the family, I think, learned pretty quickly that, you're very welcome to participate in any of these endeavors. So, and then, of course, when you have your own family, I mean, it just seemed to be part of our lives. As much as we talked at dinner, we talked about the Buckeyes and football, and we talked about politics, but we also talked about sort of the activities we'd been doing during the day. What did you do in school, but also what did you do in the community? So that just was part of our lives.
Mm-hmm. And then with your own family, do you have family meetings about your philanthropy? How do you impart those lessons to your children and grandchildren?
Well, they could probably answer that better than I can. But we, over the years, and particularly three of our four children, and I didn't mention my husband Bob, who was totally a part of all this, and one of his great interests was homelessness and the community shelter board. I mean, if I sort of pick one thing that he was involved in. So he and I think and hope, transmitted the message to our kids. And as they got older, we would tell them about what we were doing, meet with them. And then when Bob left us, three of the four, fortunately for them, anyway, they have all moved to other places sort of far away, Ireland and San Francisco, and so they're not as intimately involved, but we keep them apprised of all of what we're doing and seek their wisdom, and Tripp in particular and Lexi have been just wonderful in helping me, and I can talk a little bit more after about how we've gone about looking at our philanthropy in these last few years.
Okay, great. Sometimes it's easy for donors to give out of habit or routine, and they write a check every year, and they get asked to write a check every year, and it kind of stays the same amount, and there's nothing transformational about it. It's just kind of more of a transaction. So people get in a routine. How can the organization help them do something that's more meaningful, not only to the organization and the beneficiaries, but to them as the donor?
Well, I think that Tripp and I decided after Bob died that for the first year we were just going to kind of keep doing what we'd been doing, but then we were going to take a really good look at the various things. And as you say, you do very much get in the habit, I think, your school, your church, whatever, that come to you, okay, you gave this last year, you're going to give this again this year, or maybe you'll give a little more. But we decided that we needed to sort of evaluate and really look at our priorities. And I'm just going to step back a bit here. Some of you remember when a woman named Tracy Gary came to Columbus. She actually was part of the Pillsbury family, and at a young age she inherited money, and she didn't have any heirs, and she's written a wonderful book called Inspiring Philanthropy. But she spoke here, and then she has come back since and spoken to the Women's Fund, but this was largely inspired by women, but it made a tremendous impact on me, because she said, you know, you need to really look at what you're giving. And I want to emphasize that when we're talking about giving, it doesn't matter if it's $25, $2,500, $10,000 or more. It's anything that you can be giving. And she said, you know, I remember she talked sort of about a triangle. I mean, there are some of the things that you have to give to. I mean, you just sort of do. It may be related to your job or your school or your kids' school and so forth, and that's fine. And maybe you choose to get really involved in one of those. And then there are some that you do because a dear friend asked you, or you'd given something, you know, to them and give back. But as you go up the triangle, to be careful to look at what your real priorities are, and maybe pick the 1, 2, 3, or whatever that are your top priorities, and that are things that you are personally going to get involved in, and where you, because that, I think, as you said, Kathleen, it's so much more meaningful if you are involved in that effort, whatever it is. So, with a lot of help from the Columbus Foundation, Tripp and I, and we did keep our other children apprised of this, and they got the communications. We really looked at where we had been giving. The arts, health, education, all those things that we feel are important. But what were we missing out with? And actually, one of the things that particularly some of the out-of-town kids talked about was we weren't doing much for the environment. Well, when all this started, you know, there weren't so many organizations concerned maybe about the environment or climate change. And so we realized that was an area that we were neglecting. So we set about looking for the organization or organizations that we thought would help in that area. And then, of course, one that has become very dear to my heart are the ones around women and girls' needs, and what's now become a popular term, gender norming. I mean, I've learned a lot. But so we actually devised a plan, and not very long ago, a few weeks ago, Tripp and I sat down and we looked how was our giving this year in terms of those priorities that we set 3 years ago. How were we doing? And we'd made some shifts and we were doing pretty well, but we found ways that we could do better. And maybe there, I don't, it's hard to cut out anybody or cut down anybody. That's always really hard. But we found places where we thought maybe our greater emphasis should be.
I know that you don't shy away from new causes, and I have been a founder many times now. When it's a startup, though, there's a little more risk. So how does a donor maximize their gift and still evaluate whether the thing continues to need your funding?
Well,
or how about deserve your funding?
Yeah, that's the most fun. I have loved the various things that I've been a part with a lot of other people of getting started. I feel it here so much because the Columbus Metropolitan Club, this is where we also meet on Wednesdays usually, so it's nice to be here on a Monday with you all, and that's one of a number of things. You know, when you're not Warren Buffett or a Rockefeller or whatever, and you can't fund enormous things. You have smaller amounts, and it's so satisfying, I think, to be part of something that is a startup, if you will. But there is some risk. So I think you really have to do your homework. You have to talk to the people who are involved. I was talking to one of your members here about a startup that we've recently, that has I don't want to get into promoting any particular group here, but it has to do with homelessness and a sort of different approach. And we feel, I think, that we can maybe be part of a pilot program, or that we can also serve as a catalyst, or encourage other people to join in too. But then it is important to stay involved, see how the group is doing meeting their goals, and there are always going to be some that don't work. So, I mean, if you take risk, obviously, as all of you know, you may fail at some. But I think that it's you have to do a lot of due diligence and keep the organization needs to keep up with you, and you need to ask questions and be involved and see. But it is sort of exciting and fun to be part of something new. So I've enjoyed that.
Well, and that takes me to the Women's Fund, which has made grants of over $3 million toward programs for women and girls. You were a founder of that. And what you were just talking about was being a catalyst and leveraging. Why did you and the other founders think it was time for women to be more active as philanthropists and come together as a group, I guess?
Well, there are several people here, one in particular who it was instrumental in founding the Women's Fund. Well, for one thing, just to go back to the 7 generations of women, which was the fundraising group, if you will, for Action for Children, and really where Kathleen and my first connection was, it was kind of a forerunner. It got a bunch of women together. I'll never forget our first meeting. And there was such a sense of empowerment that women together were going to do something that was meaningful. Then, in the meanwhile, of course, we heard and were told that there were other women's funds springing up around the country. And our friend asked Judy and if we thought we might be able to get one started here. And I think one of the ways that we knew that one of our first things was to send out a survey to, just a broad range of people. And it was amazing, not only the percentage of people who responded, but responded positively. They wanted to be sure that we were not overlapping or cannibalizing any other group. And that was one of the things we were very, very careful. But I think clearly Women's Time was coming then and is going on and on. So that seemed like a good one, and it just this sense of empowerment, and there's also this sense of working together. When you have, relatively small amounts of money, it makes so much sense to work with other people and see that you can have a voice through group actions.
Mm-hmm. Because we have some development directors here, and because we as donors tend to work with, and board members work with our development directors, I wanted to mention that the relationship with a donor can have a long lead time. If you really want to do something transformational with that donor and you really want to reach who they are and what's their identity and how can this really maximize their vision of their life by making a gift. So that takes time, but yet there's turnover, there's personnel turnover in nonprofit organizations. What else can the nonprofit organization do to make sure that they still foster those relationships over time?
Well, that's such a good point, Kathleen, and I think we've all seen that in our community. I mean, it's almost sort of like musical chairs. The development directors move around, and it is a short tenure. So I think that points out a couple of things. For one thing, the development director I would compare them to the coach or the manager or the orchestra leader. I mean, they organize, they provide the backup, the tools, but they can't be the only people out there raising the money. It has to be the board members or other members of the organization who speak for it. I mean, the things that I have enjoyed the most is when I have gone with either the development director or the executive director of an organization, the CEO, and gone on fundraising calls with them. People say, "Oh, Mary, don't you just hate fundraising and asking for money?" I don't hate it if it's something I'm passionate about. I rather like it. And there's nothing that, if you're successful, you get better feedback very, very quickly. But you have to rely on your stalwart group, your board and your members, and so that you've done all the background, you've got the data, and you can present that if someone new is coming into the job. I think the other thing that's very important is sustaining the sustainability of the donors. So you get the donor the first time, and they don't hear from you hardly at all. They get a little letter the next year maybe, and then maybe eventually they don't even get that, so you haven't kept up with them. That's tremendously important, but also board members and active members, there has to be a way to keep them involved after their service. I think there's nothing, to me it's sad if you've been involved on a board and your term's up and goodbye. And well, how's so XYZ doing? I mean, there have to be mechanisms, and some organizations have been more successful than others in doing that, of staying in touch. And so that's partly the development director, it's partly the CEO or whoever it is. Being in touch, I mean, that's just such an important thing. You need to feel that you are part of this effort, that you have something of a voice in it. When you go off the board, you're no longer a voting member, but you're connected, and you can talk about it to other people in the community. And I think it's such a payoff for the organization to have those people as part of their legacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier, this could be my last question for you about family then. So you mentioned you'd like to talk more about how your family gets together and talks about philanthropy.
Well, and Kathleen, I'm going to turn it around
Yep.
and ask you too, but I don't know, we've tried various things. Sarah, you might remember once when I think I gave a Christmas check or something, and I said, you pick out who you want it to go to, but you have to let me know how it's doing and during the year and follow it. And there are many, many things like that. I'm not sure that we've done as good a job as we could have, but I think we have talked to our children and our grandchildren about how important it is for them to use their voice, and your voice can be your time, your resources, which are going to be small to begin with, but your involvement right from the get-go. And so I think that it's a wonderful way of keeping your family together, too, I think, being involved. And so I love when I talk to my kids to hear about, what things they're doing. It's interesting, our youngest daughter lives in Ireland, and they don't have the kind of, and she's remarked on that she's lived there for years. They don't have this kind of private sector that we do. To the extent, they do take care of homeless and so forth. But anyway, I think that our country does have, and there's one other thing I just want to say, and then I want to ask you back that I didn't mention. I think that one of the things in giving is this whole idea when you're giving in maybe smaller amounts and not massive amounts of social change, of changing. Okay, if you're helping someone who's homeless, that's what Bob liked so much about what was going on here. How do you prevent them from going right back into homelessness, or how do you prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place? And it's certainly been true in the Women's Fund that we have looked at how can we change the situation and the circumstances so people are better in the future. And the other thing that we've done at the Women's Fund is we've insisted that we know how they're going to pass on whatever they're to the next group, that it's just not a one-time thing, but how do you pass on what you've learned. And so I think that's what we've tried to say to our family. It's been one of the many things I think that has kept our family very close. Kathleen, I'm just going to turn it around a little because I know that you are very concerned with this area as a financial planner. Say a little bit about.
Just the two things that I think are important back to families, and you've been able to pass that on, but you can also teach. I used to only bring up philanthropy to my clients that we were already doing gifting for, and now I see that philanthropy can be a tool for anyone to just have something to talk, a way to talk to children or grandchildren about money that doesn't involve either their inheritance or your death. And so you can, so many people I know are trying to figure out how to teach their children money lessons and help them experience money before they're gone so that when they do inherit money, they know how to handle it. And so philanthropy, they can use that. They can do a small donor advised fund at an organization like Columbus Foundation, and then that can be the thing that brings them together to talk about, again, their values around money. And I love that you had Sarah, your granddaughter, report back to you where she was giving the money. I think that's a great lesson. The other thing I think I've read about development directors, they try so hard they believe their job is to educate about their needs, the needs of the organization, and sometimes they focus on that so much they forget the donor has needs too, and you need to find out what's really the thing that's going to spark their passion and allow them to be more involved, and again, as a problem solver or as a mentor. So now we could just open it up and see what other questions you might have for Mary.
Kathleen, just one other thing I thought of in thinking about giving and philanthropy. I mean, and I think we've all experienced this. I think that the person giving, and it gets every bit as much, probably more, from giving than the recipient. I mean, it just makes you feel good to think that you have a tiny role. Anyway,
that's great.
If anybody does, and nobody probably has.
Would anyone like to ask questions? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm interested in what suggestions or lessons learned you have pertaining to how to alleviate donor fatigue at different organizations whom you've worked or advised for.
And just to repeat that question, in case everybody didn't hear, the question was, how do you alleviate donor fatigue?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Don't we all just get mail after mail, or, calls, or it's time again? So it takes a kind of creative staff and board. Stories. I think that telling stories about whoever the recipients are in this case really, or if you're at an event, you can bring someone in, or you can write the stories. Some concrete examples of what you've done with the money, but that's a very good question. Another practical way of doing away with donor fatigue is to this thing that I think has become more popular, where you agree to give a certain amount for 3 years or something, then you won't hear from them much. I mean, hopefully they'll let you know what they're doing, but they won't be back to ask you every 3 years. So that's not a bad technique, but other people may have other ideas, because I think that's a real question. I doubt that there are many.
Other questions? Please, yeah, Mark.
So when you're looking at an organization to potentially donate to, what key characteristics do you look for in their performance with what they've done with money in the past that would make it more likely for you to donate?
Yeah, that's also an awfully good question.
Just to try to repeat that again. So what do you look for in an organization, how they've used the money in the past, to be able to evaluate whether you should continue to fund?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I think that it behooves donors, and I could certainly have done a better job of this, of reading financial statements, of understanding financial statements, of looking at what the organization has done with their money, how much is earned income, how much is, they've had to get through gifts, and to try to delve a little bit into seeing how they've done. I mean, I think a lot of us, we get this stuff each year and we say, oh, okay, that's good, and we put that aside and we send them our check. And we don't really take a good hard look, or certainly talking to somebody who's involved, who's on the board or the staff, and doing due diligence, I think, is very important. Again, it's that idea of giving strategically and thoughtfully, not just automatically, which doesn't bring you a lot of satisfaction or the organization. So that's a good point. Maybe we need to have more classes in how to read financial reports. I could have used that.
Looks like one more question.
Yeah, Mary, what are some of the broad areas that you're trying to impact in Columbus with your philanthropy?
Oh, okay. I can certainly mention ours, but it leaves out a lot. Our family here has had interest from, as I say, the very get-go in reproductive health for women. So, and I do believe that that's a tremendously important health issue, and so that's been very, very important to us. I think the whole issue of, there's so many, poverty and related to homelessness, but it's also related so much to education. Although we personally have maybe not, we haven't been involved directly in education, but sort of the peripheral things that so many organizations do, arts organizations that do education in the schools. I feel so strongly about that. Museum, symphony, Pro Musica, all of those. I mean, I didn't mention the arts, but I don't think we'd be a very vibrant community if we didn't have a very good arts, cultural climate. So that's certainly another one. Obviously, women's issues, and justice, I guess. I mean, equality, both racial and gender. I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but boy, do we have a long way to go. So those are awfully broad characteristics or broad parts, and you just have to pick. I mean, there are so many good things that you have to say no to, but I think if you pick the one that you maybe within those fields, if the ones that really appeal to you that you've known about, and other people pick up the other ones. So those are a few of the ones that we I think care deeply about.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you, Kathleen. Great presentation. It's great to have your insight on how to make charity work, make philanthropy work, make our city work, indeed. So thank you both. And our presenter next week is the CEO of Homeport, so somewhat related to your homelessness issue. This is low-income housing, and he'll be our presenter next Monday at our meeting. With that, I want to thank everybody once again for coming to today's meeting, and look forward to seeing you and all our guests. We hope you come back many times. Thank you.